Seated in the council room of the Assassin's Keep, Selena Sardothian leaned back in her chair. "It's past 4 in the morning," she said, adjusting the folds of her crimson silk dressing gown and crossing her bare legs beneath the wooden table. "This had better be important. Perhaps if you hadn't been reading all night, you wouldn't be so exhausted," snapped the young man seated across from her. She ignored him and studied the 4 other people assembled in the underground chamber. All male, all far older than she, and all refusing to meet her stare. A chill that didn't have to do with the drafty room ran down her spine. Picking at her manicured nails, Selena schooled her features into neutrality. The 5 assassins gathered at the long table, including herself, were 5 of Arabin Hamel's 7 most trusted companions. This meeting was undeniably important. She'd known that from a moment the serving girl pounded on her door, insisting Selena come downstairs and not even bother to get dressed. When Arabin summoned you, you didn't keep him waiting. Thankfully, her sleepwear was as exquisite as her daytime wardrobe, and cost nearly as much. Still, being 16 in a room with men made her keep an eye on the neckline of her robe. Her beauty was a weapon, one she kept honed, but it could also be a vulnerability. Arabin Hamel, king of the assassins, lounged at the head of the table, his auburn hair shining in the light from the glass chandelier. His silver eyes met hers, and he frowned. It might have just been the late hour, but Selena could have sworn that her mentor was paler than usual. Her stomach twisted. "Gregory's been caught," Arabin finally said. Well, that would explain one person missing from this meeting. His mission was a trap. He's now being held in the royal dungeons. Selena sighed through her nose. This was why she'd been awakened? She tapped a slippered foot on the marble floor. "Then kill him," she said. She'd never liked Gregory, anyway. When she was 10, she'd fed his horse a bag of candy, and he'd thrown a dagger at her head for it. She'd caught the dagger, of course, and ever since, Gregory had borne the scar on his cheek from a return throw. "Kill Gregory," demanded Sam, the young man seated at Arabin's left, a place that usually went to Ben, Arabin's second in command. Selena knew very well what Sam Cortland thought of her. She'd known since they were children, when Arabin took her in and declared her, not Sam, to be his protege and heir. That hadn't stopped Sam from trying to undermine her at every turn. And now, at 17, Sam was still a year older than she, and he still hadn't forgotten that he would always be second best. She bristled at the sight of Sam in Ben's seat. Ben would probably throttle Sam for it when he arrived. Or she could just save Ben the effort and do it herself. Selena looked to Arabin. Why hadn't he reprimanded Sam for sitting in Ben's place? Arabin's face, still handsome despite the silver starting to show in his hair, remained impassive. She hated that unreadable mask, especially when controlling her own expressions and temper remained a tad difficult. "If Gregory's been caught," Selena drawled, brushing back a strand of her long, golden hair, "then the protocol's simple. Send an apprentice to slip something into his food. Nothing painful," she added as the men around her tensed. "Just enough to silence him before he talks." Which Gregory might very well do, if he was in the royal dungeons. Most criminals who went in there never came out again. Not alive, and not in any recognizable shape. The location of the Assassin's Keep was a well-guarded secret, one she'd been trained to keep until her last breath. But even if she didn't, no one was likely to believe that an elegant manor house on a very respectable street in Rifthold was home to some of the greatest assassins in the world. What better place to hide than in the middle of the capital city? "And if he's already talked?" challenged Sam. "And if Gregory's already talked," she said, "then kill everyone who heard." Sam's brown eyes flashed as she gave him a little smile that she knew made him irate. Selena turned to Arabin. "But you didn't need to drag us here to decide this. You already gave the order, didn't you?" Arabin nodded, his mouth a thin line. Sam choked back his objection and looked toward the crackling hearth beside the table. The firelight cast the smooth, elegant panes of Sam's face into light and shadow. A face, she'd been told, that could have earned him a fortune if he'd followed in his mother's footsteps. But Sam's mother had opted instead to leave him with assassins, not courtesans, before she died. Silence fell, and a roaring noise filled her ears as Arabin took a breath. Something was wrong. What else? She asked, leaning forward. The other assassins focused on the table. Whatever had happened, they knew. Why hadn't Arabin told her first? Arabin's silver eyes became steel. Ben was killed. Selena gripped the arms of her chair. What? Ben, the ever-smiling assassin who had trained her as often as Arabin had. Ben, who had once mended her shattered right hand. Ben, the seventh and final member of Arabin's inner circle. He was barely 30 years old. Selena's lips pulled back from her teeth. What do you mean, killed? Arabin eyed her, and a glimmer of grief flashed across his face. 5 years Ben Sr. Arabin had grown up with Ben. They'd been trained together. Ben had seen to it that his friend became the unrivaled king of the assassins and never questioned his place as Arabin's second. Her throat closed up. It was supposed to be Gregory's mission, Arabin said quietly. I don't know why Ben was involved, or who betrayed them. They found his body near the castle gates. Do you have his body? She demanded. She had to see it. Had to see him one last time. See how he died. How many wounds it had taken to kill him. No, Arabin said. Why the hell not? Her fists clenched and unclenched. Because the place was swarming with guards and soldiers. Sam burst out, and she whipped her head to him. How do you think we learned about this in the first place? Arabin had sent Sam to see why Ben and Gregory were missing. If we'd grabbed his body, Sam said, refusing to back down from her glare, it would have led them right to the keep. You're assassins, she growled at him. You're supposed to be able to retrieve a body without being seen. If we grabbed his body, Sam said, refusing to back down from her glare, it would have led them right to the keep. You're assassins, she growled at him. You're supposed to be able to retrieve a body without being seen. If you'd been there, you would have done the same. Selena pushed her chair back so hard it flipped over. If I'd been there, I would have killed all of them to get Ben's body back. She slammed her hands on the table, rattling the glasses. Sam shot to his feet, a hand on the hilt of his sword. Oh, listen to you. Ordering us about like you run the guild. But not yet, Selena. He shook his head. Not yet. Enough. Arabin snapped, rising from his chair. Selena and Sam didn't move. None of the other assassins spoke, though they gripped their various weapons. She'd seen firsthand what fights at the keep were like. The weapons were as much for the bearer's own safety as they were to prevent her and Sam from doing serious damage to each other. I said enough. If Sam took one step toward her, drew his sword a fraction of an inch, that concealed dagger in her robe would find itself a new home in his neck. Arabin moved first, grabbing Sam's chin in one hand, forcing the young man to look at him. Check yourself, or I'll do it for you, boy, he murmured. You're a fool for picking a fight with her tonight. Selena bit down on her reply. She could handle Sam tonight, or any other night for that matter. If it came down to a fight, she'd win. She always beat Sam. But Sam released the hilt of his sword. After a moment, Arabin removed his grip on Sam's face, but didn't step away. Sam kept his gaze on the floor as he strode to the far side of the council room. Crossing his arms, he leaned against the stone wall. She could still reach him. One flick of her wrist, and his throat would spout blood. Selena, Arabin said, his voice echoing in the silent room. Enough blood had been spilled tonight. They didn't need another dead assassin. Ben was dead and gone, and she'd never again run into him in the halls of the keep. He'd never set her injuries with his cool, deft hands, never coax a laugh from her with a joke or a lewd anecdote. Selena, Arabin warned again. I'm done, Selena snapped. She rolled her neck, running a hand through her hair. She stalked to the door, but paused on the threshold. Just so you know, she said, speaking to all of them but still watching Sam, I'm going to retrieve Ben's body. A muscle feathered in Sam's jaw, though he wisely kept his eyes averted. But don't expect me to extend the same courtesy to the rest of you when your time comes. With that, she turned on her heel and ascended the spiral staircase to the manor above. 15 minutes later, no one stopped her when she slipped out the front gate and into the silent city streets. 2 months, 3 days, and about 8 hours later, the clock on the mantel chimed noon. Captain Rolfe, Lord of the Pirates, was late. Then again, so were Selena and Sam, but Rolfe had no excuse, Not when they were already 2 hours behind schedule. Not when they were meeting in his office. And it wasn't her fault for being tardy. She couldn't control the winds, and those skittish sailors had certainly taken their time sailing into the archipelago of the Dead Islands. She didn't want to think about how much gold Erebin had spent bribing a crew to sail into the heart of pirate territory. But Skulls Bay was on an island, so they hadn't really had a choice about their mode of transportation. Selena, concealed behind a far too stuffy black cloak, tunic, and ebony mask, rose from her seat before the pirate lord's desk. How dare he make her wait? He knew precisely why they were here, after all. 3 assassins had been found murdered by pirate hands, and Erebin had sent her to be his personal dagger, to extract retribution, preferably the gold kind, for what their deaths would cost the Assassin's Guild. With every minute he makes us wait, Selena said to Sam, the mask making her words low and soft, I'm adding an extra 10 gold pieces to his debt. Sam, who didn't wear a mask over his handsome features, crossed his arms and scowled. You'll do no such thing. Erebin's letter is sealed, and it's going to remain that way. Neither of them had been particularly happy when Erebin announced that Sam would be sent to the Dead Islands with Selena, especially when Ben's body, which Selena had retrieved, had barely been in the ground for 2 months. The sting of losing him hadn't exactly worn off. Her mentor had called Sam an escort, but Selena knew what his presence meant, a watchdog. Not that she'd do anything bad when she was about to meet the pirate lord of Aurelia. It was a once-in-a-lifetime chance. Even though the tiny, mountainous island and ramshackle port city hadn't really made much of an impression so far. She'd been expecting a manor house like the Assassin's Keep, or at least a fortified, aging castle, but the pirate lord occupied the entire top floor of a rather suspect tavern. The ceilings were low, the wooden floors creaked, and the cramped room combined with the already sizzling temperature of the southern islands meant Selena was sweating buckets beneath her clothing. But her discomfort was worth it. As they'd strode through Skulls Bay, heads had turned at the sight of her. The billowing black cape, the exquisite clothing, and the mask transformed her into a whisper of darkness. A little intimidation never did any harm. Selena walked to the wooden desk and picked up a piece of paper, her black-gloved hands turning it over to read the contents. A weather log. How dull. What are you doing? Selena lifted another piece of paper. If his pirateness can't be bothered to clean for us, then I don't see why I can't have a look. He'll be here any second, Sam hissed. She picked up a flattened map, examining the dots and markings along the coastline of their continent. Something small and round gleamed beneath the map, and she slipped it into her pocket before Sam could notice. Oh, hush, she said, opening the hutch on the wall adjacent to the desk. With these creaky floors, we'll hear him a mile off. The hutch was crammed with rolled scrolls, quills, the odd coin, and some very old, very expensive-looking brandy. She pulled out a bottle, swirling the amber liquid in the sunlight, streaming through the tiny porthole window. Care for a drink? No, Sam snapped, half twisting his seat to watch the door. Put it back. Now. She cocked her head, twirled the brandy once more in its crystal bottle, and set it down. Sam sighed. Beneath her mask, Selena grinned. He can't be a very good lord, she said, if this is his personal office. Sam gave a stifled cry of dismay as Selena plopped into the giant armchair behind the desk and set about opening the pirate's ledgers and turning over his papers. His handwriting was cramped and near illegible, his signature nothing more than a few loops and jagged peaks. She didn't know what she was looking for exactly. Her brows rose a bit at the sight of a piece of purple, perfumed paper signed by someone named Jacqueline. She leaned back in the chair, propping her feet on the desk, and read it. Damn it, Selena. She raised her brows, but realized he couldn't see. The mask and clothes were a necessary precaution, one that made it far easier to protect her identity. In fact, all of Erebin's assassins had been sworn to secrecy about who she was, under the threat of endless torture and eventual death. Selena huffed, though her breath only made the interior of the insufferable mask hotter. All that the world knew about Selena Sardothian, a Darlin's assassin, was that she was female, and she wanted to keep it that way. How else would she be able to stroll the broad avenues of Rifthold, or infiltrate grand parties by posing as foreign nobility. And while she wished that Rolf could have the chance to admire her lovely face, she had to admit that the disguise also made her rather imposing, especially when the mask warped her voice into a growling rasp. "Get back in your seat." Sam reached for a sword that wasn't there. The guards at the entrance to the inn had taken their weapons. Of course, none of them had realized that Sam and Selena were weapons themselves. They could kill Rolf just as easily with their bare hands. "Or you'll fight me?" She tossed the love letter onto the desk. "Somehow, I don't think that'd make a favorable impression on our new acquaintances." She crossed her arms behind her head, gazing at the turquoise sea visible between the dilapidated buildings that made up Skulls Bay. Sam half rose from his chair. "Just get back in your seat. I've spent the past 10 days at sea. Why should I sit in that uncomfortable chair when this one's far more suited to my tastes?" Sam let out a growl. Before he could speak, the door opened. Sam froze, but Selena only inclined her head in greeting as Captain Rolf, Lord of the Pirates, entered his office. "I'm glad to see you've made yourself at home." The tall, dark-haired man shut the door behind him. Bold move, considering who was waiting in his office. Selena remained where she sat. Well, he certainly wasn't what she'd expected. It wasn't every day that she was surprised, but she'd imagined him to be a bit dirtier and far more flamboyant. Considering the tales she'd heard of Rolf's wild adventures, she had trouble believing that this man, lean but not wiry, well-dressed but not overtly so, and probably in his late 20s, was the legendary pirate. Perhaps he, too, kept his identity a secret from his enemies. Sam stood, bowing his head slightly. "Sam Cortland," he said by way of greeting. Rolf extended a hand, and Selena watched his tattooed palm and fingers as they clasped Sam's broad hand. The map. That was the mythic map that he'd sold his soul to have inked on his hands. The map of the world's oceans. The map that changed to show storms, foes, and treasure. "I suppose you don't need an introduction." Rolf turned to her. "No." Selena leaned back farther in his desk chair. "I suppose I don't." Rolf chuckled, a crooked smile spreading across his tanned face. He stepped to the hutch, giving her the chance to examine him further. Broad shoulders, head held high, a casual grace to his movements that came with knowing he had all the power here. He didn't have a sword, either. Another bold move. Wise, too, given that they could easily use his weapons against him. "Brandy?" he asked. "No, thank you," Sam said. Selena felt Sam's eyes hard upon her, willing her to take her feet off Rolf's desk. With that mask on, Rolf mused, "I don't think you could have a drink anyway." He poured brandy for himself and took a long sip. "You must be boiling in all that clothing." Selena lowered her feet to the ground as she ran her hands along the curved edge of his desk, stretching out her arms. "I'm used to it." Rolf drank again, watching her for a heartbeat over the rim of his glass. His eyes were a striking shade of sea green, as bright as the water just a few blocks away. Lowering the glass, he approached the end of the desk. "I don't know how you handle things in the north, but down here, we like to know who we're speaking to." She cocked her head. "As you said, I don't need an introduction. And as for the privilege of seeing my beautiful face, I'm afraid that's something few men receive." Rolf's tattooed fingers tightened on the glass. "Get out of my chair." Across the room, Sam tensed. Selena examined the contents of Rolf's desk again. She clicked her tongue, shaking her head. "You really need to work on organizing this mess." She sensed the pirate grabbing for her shoulder and was on her feet before his fingers could graze the black wool of her cloak. He stood a good head taller than her. "I wouldn't do that if I were you," she crooned. Rolf's eyes gleamed with the challenge. "You're in my city and on my island. Only a handbreadth separated them. You're not in any position to give me orders." Sam cleared his throat, but Selena stared up into Rolf's face. His eyes scanned the blackness beneath the hood of her cloak, the smooth black mask, the shadows that concealed any trace of her features. "Selena," Sam warned, clearing his throat again. "Very well." She sighed loudly and stepped around Rolf as if he were nothing but a piece of furniture in her way. She sank into the chair beside Sam, who flashed her a glare that burned enough to melt the entirety of the frozen wastes. She could feel Rolf watching their every movement, but he merely adjusted the lapels of his midnight blue tunic before sitting down. Silence fell, interrupted only by the cry of gulls circling above the city and the shouting of pirates calling to one another in the filthy streets. Well, Rolf rested his forearms on the desk. Sam glanced at her. Her move. You know precisely why we're here, Selena said. But perhaps all that brandy's gone to your head. Shall I refresh your memory? Rolf gestured with his green, blue, and black hand for her to continue, as if he were a king on his throne listening to the complaints of the rabble. Ass. 3 assassins from our guild were found dead in Belhaven. The one that got away told us they were attacked by pirates. She draped an arm along the back of her chair. You're pirates? And how did the survivor know they were my pirates? She shrugged. Perhaps it was the tattoos that gave them away. All of Rolf's men had their wrists tattooed with an image of a multicolored hand. Rolf opened a drawer in his desk, pulling out a piece of paper and reading the contents. He said, Once I caught wind that Arab and Hamill might blame me, I had the shipyard master of Belhaven send me these records. It seems the incident occurred at 3 in the morning at the docks. This time Sam answered, That's correct. Rolf set down the paper and lifted his eyes skyward. So if it was 3 in the morning, and it took place at the docks, which have no street lamps, as I'm sure you know, she didn't, then how did your assassins see all of their tattoos? Beneath her mask, Selena scowled. Because it happened 3 weeks ago, during the full moon. But it's early spring. Even up in Belhaven, nights are still cold. Unless my men were without coats, there was no way for enough, Selena snapped. I suppose that piece of paper has 10 different paltry excuses for your men. She grabbed the satchel from the floor and yanked out the 2 sealed documents. These are for you. She tossed them on the desk. From our master. A smile tugged on Rolf's lips, but he pulled the documents to him, studying the seal. He held it up to the sunlight. I'm surprised it hasn't been tampered with. His eyes glimmered with mischief. Selena could sense Sam's smugness oozing out of him. With 2 deft flicks of his wrist, Rolf sliced open both envelopes with a letter knife she somehow hadn't spotted. How'd she missed it? A fool's mistake. In the silent minutes that passed as Rolf read the letters, his only reaction was the occasional drumming of his fingers on the wooden desk. The heat was suffocating and sweat slipped down her back. They were supposed to be here for 3 days, long enough for Rolf to gather the money he owed them, which, judging by the growing frown on Rolf's face, was quite a lot. Rolf let out a long breath when he finished and shuffled the papers into alignment. Your master drives a hard bargain, Rolf said, looking from Selena to Sam. But his terms aren't unfair. Perhaps you should have read the letter before you started flinging accusations at me and my men. There will be no retribution for those dead assassins, whose deaths, your master agrees, were not my fault in the least. You must have some common sense then. Selena quelled the urge to lean forward. If Arabin wasn't demanding payment for the death of those assassins, then what were they doing here? Her face burned. She'd looked like a fool, hadn't she? If Sam smiled just the slightest bit, Rolf drummed his inked fingers again and ran a hand through his shoulder-length dark hair. As for the trade agreement he's outlined, I'll have my accountant draw up the necessary fees, but you'll have to tell Arabin that he can't expect any profits until at least the 2nd shipment, possibly the 3rd. And if he has an issue with that, then he can come down here himself to tell me. For once, Selena was grateful for the mask. It sounded like they'd been sent for some sort of business investment. Sam nodded at Rolf, as if he knew exactly what the pirate lord was talking about. And when can we tell Arabin to expect the 1st shipment? He asked. Rolf stuffed Arabin's letters into a desk drawer and locked it. The slaves will be here in 2 days, ready for your departure the day after. I'll even loan you my ship, so you can tell that trembling crew of yours they're free to return to Rifthold tonight, if it pleases them. Selena stared at him. Arabin had sent them here for slaves? How could he stoop so disgustingly low? And to tell her she was going to Skull's Bay for one thing, but to really send her here for this. She felt her nostrils flare. Sam had known about this deal, but he'd somehow forgotten to mention the truth behind their visit, even during the 10 days they'd spent at sea. As soon as she got him alone, she'd make him regret it. But for now, she couldn't let Rolf catch on to her ignorance. "You'd better not botch this," Selena warned the pirate lord. "Arabin won't be pleased if anything goes awry." Rolf chuckled. "You have my word that it will all go according to plan. I'm not lord of the pirates for nothing, you know." She leaned forward, flattening her voice into the even tones of a business partner concerned about her investment. "How long, exactly, have you been involved in the slave trade?" It couldn't have been long. Adarlan had only started capturing and selling slaves 2 years ago, most of them prisoners of war from whatever territories dared rebel against their conquest. Many of them were from Alwi, but there were still prisoners from Melisand and Fenharrow, or the isolated tribe in the White Fan Mountains. The majority of slaves went to Calaculla or Endivir, the continent's largest and most notorious labor camps, to mine for salt and precious metals. But more and more slaves were making their way into the households of Adarlan's nobility. And for Arabin to make a filthy trade agreement, some sort of black market deal, it would sully the Assassin's Guild's entire reputation. "Believe me," Rolf said, crossing his arms, "I have enough experience. You should be more concerned about your master. Investing in the slave trade is a guaranteed profit, but he might need to expend more of his resources than he'd like in order to keep our business from reaching the wrong ears." Her stomach turned over, but she feigned disinterest as best she could and said, "Arabin is a shrewd businessman. Whatever you can supply, he'll make the most of it. For his sake, I hope that's true. I don't want to risk my name for nothing." Rolf stood, and Selena and Sam rose with him. "I'll have the document signed and return to you tomorrow. For now," he pointed toward the door, "I have 2 rooms prepared for you." "We only need one," she interrupted. Rolf's eyebrows rose suggestively. Beneath her mask, her face burned, and Sam choked on a laugh. "1 room, 2 beds." Rolf chuckled, striding to the door and opening it for them. "As you wish. I'll have baths drawn for you as well." Selena and Sam followed him out into the narrow, dark hallway. "You could both use one," he added with a wink. It took all of her self-restraint to keep from punching him below the belt.